Good morning. Happy Monday. It is time for just a word from the Word. Today's passage comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 11, verse 2, and I'm reading from the King James. And here's what it says. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor jewels of silver and jewels of gold. If you pay attention to the context of the passage, the children of Israel and the land of Egypt, God had been pouring out plague after plague after plague. Some the Israelites had to endure, but not all. The Egyptians had to endure every single plague that God had poured out. But there was one more plague while they were in the land that God was going to pour out, and that was going to be the angel of death that was going to kill the firstborn in whose household there was not blood upon the door. And God tells Moses that I've got one more plague. So tell Israel to borrow from their neighbors. Now, God was not telling them to borrow from fellow Jews. God was telling them to borrow from the Egyptians. And the things that they were to borrow were jewels, gold, raiment. They were to borrow these precious things from their enemy. But it's an interesting thing. And if you watched Brother Gurley yesterday, you'll know where this thought really began to jump off from. When you borrow something, you intend to give it back. That's the idea of borrowing. When you borrow something from somebody, it is a temporary thing that you have received. You intend to not keep it. You intend to give it back. But God tells the Israelites to borrow from the Egyptians. If you read in chapter 3 in Exodus, God tells them, he's preparing them, like, look, you need to start borrowing from the Egyptians. And God's intention was that they would spoil the Egyptians. And as you read further, both in chapters 3 and chapter 11, more so in chapter 11, that God gave Israel favor in the eyes of the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians, they knew that the plagues were coming from the God of the Israelites. So they were like, okay, go here. Take my jewels, take my gold, take my raiment. But what we find is that after God delivered Israel, after they came out of Egypt, after God had taken them through the Red Sea and had drowned their enemies, the last and final judgment upon the Egyptians, then God calls Moses up to the mountain, gives him the instructions for the tabernacle, and Moses comes down, and the children of Israel take those things that were borrowed. Hear me. Takes those things that were borrowed from their enemy to bless the house of the Lord. Now, you can go a lot of ways with that, but the one thing that has just not left me, I've been thinking about this since Brother Gurley mentioned the borrowing yesterday in his devotion. So forgive me, Brother Gurley, this is your fault. The one thing that has stood out to me over and over and over again was that the things that we gain while being persecuted from our enemy become a blessing to the house of God. Let me say that again, because you might not have heard it the first time, and you might need to think about that. When we are being bombarded by our enemy, we gain things from that. We gain strength. We gain fortitude. We gain a sense, or at least we should, a sense of thankfulness for the blessings of God because of the evil that we've had to endure. When we take those things that we have gained from our trials, when we take those things that we have acquired in our time of testing, those things become the building blocks. Oh, I feel the Holy Ghost. Those things become the building blocks for the presence of God, not just in your life. Oh, hear me. They become a blessing to those that are around us. You see, that's what God did for the children of Israel. They borrowed from their enemy. They took the goods that they could gain from their disparate, terrible situation, and they turned it into a blessing, because from those things that they gained from their enemy, the house of God was built. Oh, do you feel the presence of the Lord in that? The things that you gain from your trials will build up the tabernacle of God. You are not the only one that will benefit from the things that you gain out of your trials. The children of God gain and are blessed from the things that you have gained from your trial. So go ahead, borrow from your enemy, because there will be blessing, not just for you, but for those that are around you. And that is just a word from the Word. If I go any further, I'll end up preaching. So God bless you. Have a beautiful day. Enjoy the blessings of the Lord, and don't keep it for yourself. Use it for the glory of the kingdom. God bless you. Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow morning.